Massachusetts, and we're at the St. Mary's Cemetery, a Catholic cemetery. It's in somewhat the northern part of Northampton. It's extremely large, and there's so many components to it. I got to show them to you to make sure you understand the cemetery. Now, at this point, it's across the street, and it's across now the highway. So it's across Damon Road and it's across North Elm Street. So we're going to go into the second oldest section, then into the oldest section and stay a long time there, and then to the very new. But there's so many sections. And yes, I know in a Catholic cemetery everything's in neat rows, and this one is just like all the others. So there's a couple of features I'll show you in this section, and then the really good stuff is across the street. So this was made 1939, and then it built up and it filled up very quickly. Northampton's a big place, lots of Catholics, and it does fill up, and so within 60 years it was filled. But one nice little thing, they have a beautiful section back here to honor the veterans, and so they have a stone back there where the men who died because of World War II, who had lived in Northampton, are honored in that beautiful stone. Now, another feature with the second oldest section across to the north of North Elm Street is it has a mausoleum, and we'll go by that. Alright, so here's the mausoleum. It's in front of us. There's no little patch there to go around it, but it's a nice little mausoleum. It's for two different families at once, and they share it, the Hackney family and the Trottier family, and they get married, and so they're filling up. And it's always cool to see a mausoleum. Now what we do for you now is cross North Elm Street and go into the very oldest section of St. Mary's Cemetery. Okay, now you start to see some old stones here, but very quickly you get into more modern. So what are you seeing here? You're seeing along this outer perimeter against North Elm Street some of the very first burials within the cemetery itself. Okay, now look in front of you. You see a gravestone, and there's actually a curb in front of the St. says St. Mary's, and then you see a gravestone. There's horizontal component and a vertical component. It says Patrick Moyse. He was the founder and the first pastor of the St. Mary's Church. Now, seeing that he was, almost always any priest, pastor that dies pre-1900 will be buried alongside the church. And he was too. I cannot prove that fully at this point, but I'm going to attach this video to my webpage, and in that webpage, devoted to St. Mary's Cemetery, I'll be putting pictures and text, and I hope to prove at some point that this gravestone was actually along the predecessor church, the St. Mary's Church. The one you see in downtown Northampton is from 1881, but he died before that. He died and was buried alongside the wooden-clad predecessor church called St. Mary's also. And that church was erected in probably the 1850s. All right, and thus it's a very old church, and it's gone now. And not only he was buried there in 1871, okay, before that and after that, also many of his parishioners were buried in the backyard of that church. It was a true church and churchyard arrangement where the cemetery had burials. And all those barriers were taken out, and I don't know when, and that I'm not going to investigate too. But when they opened up the downtown Virgin St. Mary's Church in 1881, it was probably true. They took down the old church, and they probably in that year moved all the old burials to here. And so you have what you have. You have an old gravestone that looks just like the one that would be used for the ancient burials of pastors. And sure, it needs a cleaning, but it's very nice. Now we're going to see some of those old berries up close when we go down another road. So, but just remember, most of the old burials that were directly put into the St. Mary's Cemetery were put in off of the northwest corner where St. Mary's Cemetery meets Northampton Street. Now, it's a large cemetery. We're not going to go down every street. But back here are some very old stones to the right. So there's a section of land with a bunch of very old stones. And if you start to read them, you realize that they're extremely old. Some from the 1840s, 1850s, 1860s, 1870s. Now, were they put here when the cemetery was made? The cemetery was probably made sometime, I believe, in the very early 1870s. But the predecessor cemetery had burials, and they were moved. They're not in the place they used to be. They used to be on King Street, reaching out from the end of King Street out to Union Street. They're not there anymore. They're taken out, and they're here. They're back near the old schoolhouse. They were moved here. The schoolhouse was here from, I believe, about 1881, and the gravestones are probably put back on this old section here. All right, so you have two sections where you have very old gravestones, and you have to figure out why. These are the reinterments from the very old ancient burial grounds. Now there's some modern ones, or newer ones mixed in with it. All right, and the way the cemetery was arranged in the beginning, the stones on the left of me was bought because the land was bought over here later, and the stones on the right are very old. So in this road, you go down and you have extreme age difference, maybe 100 years age difference from left to right. Okay, now if you want to find the truly old stones of the cemetery, they are thus on the interior road from the schoolhouse. Go up to back towards Northampton Street, and then look to your right, and we're looking right out. These are the very old ones. The first one placed originally and never moved are right in this corner here. So you have stones from the early 1870s. Inside of here, you'll have stones with inscriptions that say, this person died in the Mill River flood of 1874. I found 3 stones in the cemetery because 147 people died in one day in Northampton and Williamsburg because of a massive dam collapse, and it flooded the area. Okay, now we're going to go back out to the road because there's a lot more to see. Okay, now the last time we went in the second gate, they came out the first. Now there's a third gate here. Okay, and this one is mostly for the maintenance workers to go in. Okay, then there's a fourth gate. And so you have 4 choices along Northampton Street. The one that's closest to Demon Road is the one we're taking now. And I better interpret what you're going to see here again. On your left, you see very modern stones, and on your right, you see much older stones. and this time it's an age difference of about 60 years. That's because on your left-hand side, there used to be a person's house. And the cemetery bought that house, and thus started putting stones up, but the stones on the other side were much older. And these are the family sections. These are the stones that people bought out maybe 1910, 1920, 1930, in order to get their whole family into there. Now, there's a pastor in front of us. It's Mark Kenny, right? And this is one of the pastors of the St. Mary's Cemetery. He's buried here, and this cemetery is great for having a lot of its pastors being buried within the cemetery. And I'm keeping a list on my St. Mary's Church website that has all the different pastors, where they're buried, so forth. So you'll get to know that this certain pastor is in this area, right? And that's important. People like to stay in touch with all the different amount of pastors and where they ended up. But a church like St. Mary's, which is a mother church for Northampton and the wider region around it, you're going to have a lot of pastors wanting to be buried here. Now, in front of us, there's a large priest stone. So there's no official priest circle. Both circles have only one priest. And then the other priests are in a stone that's in front of us that has one flat stone, and then around it 4 large sections with one pastor on each side. So no official priest circle, but you get the equivalent. And that's going to happen when the cemetery is extremely old. You might not have a priest circle, because that concept really didn't come around until the very early 1900s. Now, some stones are incredibly large and gorgeous. Some Catholics started getting great wealth inside the city. Okay, now, every Catholic cemetery needs to have 2 sections more. Okay, one of those sections is right in front of us. I'll show you it. I'm going to drive down here. And this is the section where you bury the poor people. So all these stones, there's not many of them, are erected by a family where later they probably put them up like 10 years later when they get some money. But when they didn't have money, they had to be buried in the Potter's Field. And this is the Potter's Field of the St. Mary's Cemetery that we're in right now. Now, next to every Potter's Field, there should be a baby section. And what I mean by baby section, there should be a section where the babies that were not baptized are still buried within the cemetery. And where is that? Okay, that is right here. Okay, we're near section M. I see a sign for section M. I see a sign that says Rosary. So we're in a section near the houses between Damon Road. And we see a vast empty space. And then we see some small gravestones. This is where the non-baptized babies were buried. They're all buried here. Some have stones to them, most do not. Now I measured this off, I pasted it off in both directions, and then I estimated how big a baby's coffin would be. When they're not baptized, they're probably a child 1 month old, or anything less than 8 months. A lot of times they wouldn't be baptized, parents wouldn't do it right away. And then I used that measurements. I tried to guess how many babies are here. And I came up with 1,000 babies are buried here in this green strip. All right. The Catholics officially do not think that babies should be buried in a holy part of the cemetery, and so they are where they are. Now, St. Mary's is mostly Irish, and there were other ethnic groups, and they got their own little portion. Now, St. Mary's Church spawned off a lot of other churches, and Polish, French Canadian, and so forth. And I found the Polish section. The Polish like to be buried in their own section, and that's in front of us right now. It's very large. It's with a lot of the same gravestone. Notice a lot of them are with a cross upon them. They love that kind of gravestone, and most of them are about 100 years old from now, and lots of Polish names on them. Okay, now we're going to go to one more section. Probably noticed that gorgeous statue of, I think it's the angel on it. Beautiful gravestones in here. But St. Mary's is filled up so much that I had to buy a third section for itself. And this is within the last 20 years, right? In this section, you can see now on your right-hand side, there's also left-hand side, which will end up filling up. And incredible, there's so many gravestones back here. And they have a statue back here, and they're trying to make it look beautiful like the rest of the cemetery. And they're doing a fairly decent job. So thank you for coming on this car tour.